Welcome to the Bearded Truth, guys. John Beard and I are back to review a few highlights of the inauguration and also some of the very exciting executive orders that were just signed by Trump. So, John, what were your top highlights?
Ooh, I mean, my top highlight, I'd say, of the inauguration itself would have been during the song, what was it called, America the Beautiful, I think, that Carrie Underwood was singing, because it was initially a very awkward moment when the music wasn't coming on,
It
and it
was.
went on for a pretty long time. But once she eventually did just start singing, and the whole kind of audience were singing with her, it was much better than I think than if there had been music. It was very
Yeah,
impactful once they started singing
absolutely.
it.
And not every singer could have done that. Like if the music would have cut out, or maybe their fake track that they would be ad libbing to, it would have been like, oh, she can't do
Yeah.
it. She's not gonna make it through this. But I like my favorite part was when the music wouldn't start, and there was just a whole lot of like awkward
So you
blinking.
like the awkwardness.
I
I
did.
like
I
the
was
part where it got
laughing.
saved. You like the actual awkwardness before they saved it.
Like her little fake eyelashes were batting, and she's just like waiting, and Trump was blinking, and everybody was like, the opposition was kind of like smirking. I was like, wow, what's gonna happen? But she nailed it, man. She nailed it.
Yeah, she saved it for sure.
Yeah, she did. Oh, that was great. And so that was a highlight for me. And Melania's outfit was another highlight for me. And then the prayer, the middle guy who prayed.
Oh gosh. From the curvaceous mountains to the yeah, that
Yeah, from
guy.
the mountains of New York.
Yeah.
He got into it. At first, I was like, get it, get it. And then I was like, oh, he's really getting it.
Yeah, he named a lot of states. I was like, how many of these are
He
we gonna
did.
name?
I know. I started kind of going, okay, guys, let's sum it up. But it was genuine. Genuine. It was very heartfelt. And I like that Trump stepped in and like gave him a big hug when he finished. Farron was like, he probably did it because he was nervous. He was like, oh, all right. Good job.
Like it's over.
Oh no, it was cool, and it's just people's reaction. Also, I love watching people's reaction. Like it's very natural in the audience, and so like Elon and Barron and all these people, and you're like, who's who in the audience? It's interesting for sure. Um, so for the highlights as far as executive orders go, this is big news. John and I covered a lot. Y'all can go back and watch the videos that we were making right before the election, talking about how crucial of an election this really is. And so like one of the number one points on my list for things that were so urgent for the nation, and there were a lot of things, was the border crisis and how many illegal immigrants and how many gangs had come across the cartel members, the drug trafficking, the sex trafficking, everything that was happening. It's a major, major threat. So Trump did issue an executive order declaring a national emergency at the southern border of the United States. I'm going to read a little bit from that in a second. But here's a few top highlights. He rescinded 78 executive orders of Biden. He proclaimed that there are only two recognized biological sexes in America, male and female. He pardoned 1,500 who I would call political prisoners from January 6th. He named the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. And I think from my perspective, that was just a huge statement of like America first. That was his way of being like, we're coming in um, really strong, and this is my proclamation of like all the things, all the domino effect, and all the things that I'm going to start doing. And so that was kind of a big fireworks moment. And I know a lot of people are going to roll their eyes at that, but I thought it was pretty great. He issued 10 executive actions on border security, 10 of them. And I am going to just read from this real quick, and then I'm going to let you talk about your highlights for executive orders. So, under the national emergency at the southern border, it says American sovereignty is under attack. Our southern border is overrun by cartels, criminal gangs, known terrorists, human traffickers, smugglers, unvetted military males from foreign adversaries, and illicit narcotics that harm Americans, including America. This invasion has caused widespread chaos and suffering in our country. Over the last 4 years, it has led to the horrific and inexcusable murders of many innocent American citizens, including women and children, at the hands of illegal aliens. And then he goes on to talk about the foreign criminal gangs and cartels who have been seizing control at the border. So, huge. Again, this is a national security issue, and it's been happening far too long. We don't even know the full extent of it. And so he's sending military down to the border. I don't know if you got a glimpse of that, but he's basically one of the executive orders was to send military personnel down to the border immediately and to work with Homeland Security to secure the border and to start immediately building the border wall again. So that was one of the top ones for me. It was huge.
Yeah, I did rank. It's hard to tease apart some of these related executive orders, but I did certainly rank immigration as the number one most impactful thing that we saw on the first day of the executive orders that were signed. I mean, I think you did a great job outlining them again. National Border Emergency, which is just going to allow us to mobilize a lot more resources there, including both financial resources and boots on the ground to that border wall. What's interesting about designating the cartels as the terrorist organizations is that, so not only, like you said, are we now supplying more troops to the border wall itself on, say, our side of the border, and they are resuming construction of that wall, so securing the border itself, but because the cartels are being classified as a terrorist organization, that does give permission, with if future jurisdiction is granted, to send troops into Mexico to eliminate terrorist organizations. Kind of like think about how he went to Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan to
Wait, so
eliminate
you
terrorist
think that,
organizations.
I'm sorry to interrupt. You really think that will give him jurisdiction in Mexico? That's basically a war.
Well,
So.
during the well, here's the difference. It's not against Mexican civilians or Mexican government. The idea is essentially that, oh, hey, Mexico, we noticed that you have this horrible infestation inside your country, and not only is it affecting your household, but your next door neighbors over here, us, are also being affected by it. We're going to come in for you and take care of this problem. Don't worry about it. We got this. Now, I think it's very likely that the Mexican government would not like that, because the Mexican government has been in bed with cartels for a long time now. They're also corrupt, as it's very common knowledge here in America and in Mexico. For example, like the police are corrupt in Mexico at this point. So would there be resistance? Probably. I don't think it would be from your regular Mexican citizens or civilians. I think it might be from the people who are profiting from the cartels. But could we actually do it? That question was specifically asked on Monday while he was signing it. One of the reporters asked, would you think about ordering U.S. Special Forces into Mexico to take the cartels, out? And Trump said, could happen. Stranger things have happened. And then he signed it. So
Oh, what?
it is very possible you could have the American military, whichever branch, whether it's Coast Guard or Army or whoever, moving into Mexico to eliminate cartel groups.
Whew. Yeah, so
SEALs, Marines, whoever.
it's a new age of the war on drugs, because the fentanyl crisis is such a large issue. But when you were talking about it, the two things that came to mind is how messy and like the web of connection uh, that goes into this. Because I was watching the Mexican elections recently, and the guy I was really hoping would get in didn't, and he was a hardcore Catholic gentleman. I'll have to throw up his name and his picture here, but he actually helped on the set of Sound of Freedom. He's
Mm.
very has a huge heart for the anti-trafficking movement. He's a man of faith. He was like praying the rosary every day for his country. Uh, and thankfully, God's hand of protection was very identifiably on him. One of Trump's sons went down to Mexico to support him during the campaign, but everybody else, there were a lot of other candidates. I don't know if you remember this. They were getting picked off, basically like assassinated by the drug cartel. And so, the rumor is that the lady that got elected is just in bed with the cartel. Um, so, metaphorically,
Oh, okay. Just checking.
uh, but yeah, so it's a very corrupt system. So to say like the cartel is completely separate from the government or completely separate from the police force is obviously not true.
Right.
And the fentanyl crisis is also like deeply entangled. For anybody that follows Lara Logan, one of my favorite investigative journalists, she was detailing a lot of the information about how the Chinese are running some of the fentanyl labs in Mexico. And I thought that was really, really interesting. And so there's a lot that goes into this. I'm gonna be following this closely. I want to see how fast Trump can start making a move on these things and cleaning things up because we need it badly.
I also heard, I don't remember what source, I know it wasn't the same one that you mentioned, but I heard elsewhere that China was funneling fentanyl into America through Mexico as well. So I have heard that. And you mentioned earlier one of the phrases you used, you said like this is going to, I think, accelerate or something of that nature, the war on drugs. And I know that has had at times a negative connotation for some people because in some cases the war on drugs has been seen as or perhaps has been used to directly target the American people who are using the drugs. So the war on drugs not so much targeting the source, but rather the kind of endpoint. This rather would be a very different kind of war on drugs where you are taking the fight to the source. And I think that is the only way it's even possible to have a genuine and fruitful, say, war on drugs, because just trying to stop them coming across the border as much as you can, and then whenever it gets through, it just ends up first hurting and killing, especially with fentanyl, American people, and then people who it doesn't hurt or kill, or maybe it's hurting them but hasn't killed them yet, then our efforts on this side of the border is just to arrest those people using the drugs. It's not nearly as productive as just going into the places that are actually making the drugs in another country and stopping them permanently. So, yeah, in the case of that phrase war on drugs, perhaps you'll see a much more real war on drugs, not just higher police efforts in local or state jurisdictions, but truly using a military to go into their place to stop it at the source. Very exciting. To me, that's the most exciting thing that I saw on Monday.
Oh wow. I mean, it's really it's hard to say for me that there was one like top exciting one.
It's a
I was
lot.
excited about all of them because it was a lot. I don't even know if I fully unpacked all of them, but I think like trying to make sure we're safe and secure as a nation again is a pretty big deal. And so that's why that one with the border crisis stood out to me so much. But pardoning the political prisoners, that's huge. I mean, I saw some of the arrests that were made, like in the middle of the night or early in the morning, busting down people's door. The kids were screaming. It's like these were a lot of these people were patriots, you know, and it was a political prisoner situation. A lot of Trump's friends were thrown in prison. I mean, they tried to throw Trump himself in prison. So we know what was actually taking place. And it was frightening. And so I think a lot of the people and Christians, especially who were awake after all of this, were like, well, what's next? Like, when are they going to come after me? You know? And that's a fair question to ask. And that kind of brings me to one of my main points that I really felt like the Lord was impressing upon me right after Trump was elected. And I'll probably make a whole nother segment just on this. But I really believe very strongly that the church has to take a stand. It has to take a stand, not just at this hour, but at every next hour, and be involved in the American political process by running for office, electing people to office, praying for the nation. I mean, we were praying very specifically and fasting up until the election for America. I remember having a conversation with Uncle Mark about this, and he said, "I've never prayed as hard for America as I'm praying now." And we were talking about things happening congressionally and just the height of immorality in the nation, everything going on. So the church, we can't just like, oh, Trump got elected, so everything is fine. The church has to be involved, and it's like it's become kind of a 1776 moment where we have to reclaim our rights and our freedoms. And if anyone knows their American history, the church was at the core of the American Revolution. You know, it started, I always like to say, it started in the pulpit. It started in the pulpit. It's like this nation was claimed for Christ. And people can argue against that. That's fine. But history testifies differently to the fact that we were founded and framed as a nation that feared God and loved God and put God first. And so we can't just not only forget that, but not be a part of that movement anymore. I think it's a time more than ever for the priests and pastors to be fiery again and to help lead the people to a place of moral centeredness again, and not be afraid to talk about pro-life movement and bills that are being passed and things that are being said. It's we shouldn't be so afraid of that, you know. And I think, like Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, not to speak is to speak. And so that really was resonating in my spirit after Trump got elected. And all of this is really great, but kind of like I told you, it looks like executive orders based on whoever the president is can just be rescinded or re-signed, and this is it's this switch that flips on and off and on and off based on who's elected. And so we have to make sure that who comes next after Trump is a God-fearing man or woman, that we've been praying for, and that we elect that position, you know. So
Yeah, some to some extent that is certainly the case, and it's probably a net good thing that executive orders can be reversed so easily, because you really don't want, what's the adage that I think was started with Obama? It's like ruling with a pen and a phone. You don't
mm,
want a president who is just abusing his executive authority, especially abusing, say, like emergency situations. You'll notice like a lot of these executive orders that Trump is doing, it's like national emergency, because that opens up so much potential. And we've seen that being abused for the last 2 decades of like, oh, we're in war, so as the president, I get to do whatever I want. It's like, well, you just started that war so that you could do whatever you wanted. Um, so it's very frustrating to see the executive branch be abused and misused. And at least, so we saw Biden do a lot of executive orders that we were not very fond of. So at least if it's someone you don't like and they're putting their executive orders, you do have the solace of knowing the next person can come through and rescind it just as easily. Now, some things are easier to rescind than others. For example, if you start an executive order month one, day one of year one to start reconstruction of a border wall, it's kind of hard to undo that 4 years later. I mean, you could, as a very aggressive stance, pass an executive order to start demolitioning the wall, but that would, I think that would probably get some blowback, and you could get caught by the courts. And even some of the stuff that Trump is trying to do right now, we still have to see if the courts will approve it or not. For example, the one of the biggest ones that most likely will see
birthright.
legal pressure is birthright citizenship. We'll get to that in a second. I'll go ahead and just say that I agree with what you're saying about the church and our role in this country. It certainly is not the time to sit back and relax. Our responsibilities as members of the church, as members of the body of Christ, starts and stops with prayer. It's not a last resort, it's a daily practice.
Mm.
And that goes both for our personal responsibility. The very first calling that each person has is to be holy and to be like God. So the only way you do that is by spending time with Him so that you can reflect Him. So we all are called, our primary vocation is to be holy, therefore we have to pray. Our tertiary vocation may be something to do with our citizenship and our civic duty, which also involves prayer. So now it's certainly time
Mm.
to act and pray. And perhaps, like you're saying, with the silence we've had, the lack of speech from the church in recent years, recent maybe century, is probably why we're in this situation that we are in now, where you have had such moral decline and decay, because the people who, in theory, know right from wrong and know good and evil have been silent about it. So what's the utility of knowing something if you're not going to share it or not going to act upon it? You might as well not know. So certainly, we're just getting started, and this is a very inspiring time, and very, that to me, one of the most exciting things about the executive orders that we see being signed on Monday, and I think more are still on the way, is just showing that a lot of the stuff that Trump said that he was going to do during the campaign trail. I mean, there were so many times he said, I'm going to do this day one, I'm doing that day one. Day one, this is going to happen. I'm like, how many things can you really do on day one? Like this is, I was starting to get a little disillusioned. Like, okay, it's probably just like a little bit of politics here. You can't do all this. He did so much day one. And it's like, wow, he is
Yeah,
dead serious.
yeah, and he did it publicly.
Right. And I mean, how neat is that to have a press conference in the room where you're signing executive orders? And you're saying every time you hold one up, you're like, what is this? What is this? What is this one? And like the guy handing to him is explaining it, and he's signing it and taking questions, answering questions.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never seen anyone else do that. I don't know.
It was celebratory, and we were able to be a part of that process, which was really, it was an epic moment.
Yeah.
So
And another one of those things under that immigration umbrella is we're I'd say we can finish with birthright citizenship for the immigration block. But we already mentioned resuming the construction of the border wall. He's also resuming remain in Mexico. So asylum seekers have to wait in Mexico at the border until they've been heard in an immigration court before they can come in. Because you had so many cases the last 4 years of asylum seekers coming in and getting a court date to show up in an immigration court and just not showing up. And they're just essentially cut loose into the country. Similarly, Trump also ended day one the CBP One app, which was that really controversial mobile app that was kind of redesigned to be used for immigration. And I think at least 1 million migrants were admitted to the country through the app. So this is people who are already in the country. They download the app on their phone, and then it's just like magic. They are admitted into the country. So he got rid of that app. He resumed remain in Mexico. He resumed construction border wall. He resumed all of his strict and stringent border policies and immigration policies that were in place from somewhere between 2016 and 2020 are now back, in addition to the bigger ticket items, like we said, border emergency, designation of cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, and now this attempt to redefine birthright citizenship, which to me was like, when I read the headline, I was like, you're removing birthright citizenship. Like, how else do you want us to be citizens? Like, it's necessary. And then once I realized the details was that you can't be an illegal or temporary resident and have your child automatically be made a citizen. That to me makes complete and total sense. I really don't know how else, because you do have stories from Border Patrol of pregnant women coming over the border, not even making it a mile in, just to give birth so their child would be an automatic American citizen. It's like, how is that a good policy? Like, that doesn't make any sense at all. Likewise, you wouldn't want someone on a temporary 2-week visa to come in and give birth while they happen to be here in the hotel room. Like, hey, this is an American child. Like, no, it's not. Where are you? Who are you? Where did you come from? It's like, bye, I gotta go back to my home country, but now I'm an American citizen. It's like, that doesn't make any sense.
Do you think people ever do that though? Like for dual citizenship, like in other countries as well, or
Probably, yeah. I don't think it's an American only issue, but I think it's part of our catastrophic immigration policy we have now. It may only be one element of it, but that is one of those things that people have been using. I think it's related to like the Dreamers. I think those are those children of illegal immigrants who were born here. And then it's like, well, if you deport their parents, you're separating them from their child, so you can't do that. And so, well, first of all, yes, we can. Second of all, yes, we should. But third of all, now you won't have that problem anymore because, well, while everyone who's already been born here is protected, going forward, you won't have any more legal citizens to illegal immigrant parents where neither parent is even a citizen. It's like, how are they even here? So just because they happen to give birth here, now that they get to stay? No. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's definitely going to go to the courts.
Has to, because it's a constitutional issue.
It wasn't a 14th Amendment issue.
Right.
So I guess we'll see how that plays out. I was not as invested into that as a few of the other ones. So the withdrawal from the WHO, big thumbs up for that. I'm not a fan of the WHO. I'm not a fan of the United Nations, and I'm not a fan of the World Economic Forum. So any withdrawals, like he withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement. So I don't know if you were a fan of that or not.
No, I'm not a fan of it. It's just, on one hand, a lot of these things are seemingly ways for other countries and global companies to make money. And it's like, why do we need to fund anything to do with the Paris Accords? Why do we need to give money to the World Health Organization? No, of course not.
So you were for the executive order to leave, to exit. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think. And the major issue with a lot of these modern, I think they're being referred to as environmental justice programs. It's like, okay, so we're going to make this mandate where half of all vehicles are going to be completely electric, no emissions by 2030, as if that's going to somehow make any impact on a global scale. If the idea is this is about global climate change, and you have countries like China and India that are so far outproducing us in all kinds of emissions and pollutants, you changing this car policy or trying to do something with, God forbid, cows and agriculture is not going to change a 0.1 degree Celsius scale change on the global scale. So why are we doing it? It doesn't make sense. It's like you're going to damage the way that we live in our country. You're going to damage the way that people get to work. You're going to damage the way that we make money, just so that seemingly no significant change occurs. It's a lot of it is nonsense.
And it also is draining for the American taxpayer. I didn't even know this honestly until today. I didn't realize that it was going to save the American taxpayer $1 trillion to pull out of this Paris climate agreement. And apparently it wasn't balanced because they were taking money from other countries, including America, but not at like an equal rate. And America was being supposedly overtaxed. I'm like, well, whose pockets does that line? You know?
Right. And to be honest, I really don't know a whole lot, or I don't remember a whole lot about the Paris Climate Accords. I think the last time I looked into it was like 2015 when it was started under Obama. And I don't think I've looked since. I just remember my ultimate conclusion was that didn't care for it at all. So I'm fine with leaving it. I do know the World Health Organization similarly was that, according to Trump, during the signing of the executive order, said that China was paying 39 million to the World Health Organization. We were paying, I think, 500 million, he said. So again, and this is also what he said with like NATO, and I think he already fixed that in his first term, that it's unfair payment going on one hand. But that's really only one part of the issue for me.
Yeah,
Um,
actually, just to clarify, I made a misstatement. It was the
1 billion.
taxpayer money no going to the World Health Organization that was being taxed more than all the other nations. So our money going to the WHO like far outweighed what was being taken from China, and their population is much larger than ours. But it still saves, to restate it, per Trump, withdrawing from the climate pact will save taxpayers $1 trillion. So,
I wonder over
um,
what time scale. I'm sure there's some conditions there to make that true, but it's a lot of money. I
it's a
wonder
lot of money.
how that's possible.
So, withdrawing from both the WHO and the climate pact saves American taxpayer dollars. And it kind of makes you wonder, like, golly, like, we already knew Ukraine was just dumping money into Ukraine. And that's a whole kind of scheme going on. I won't get into that right now. But it's like, how much money are they draining out of the pockets of American people? And where is it really going? You know? So that's crazy to me. So I love that he knew, he was aware, and that was the first thing he did on the first day, was to withdraw from that.
Yeah, I like leaving the World Health Organization. I think they handled COVID extremely poorly. Not just ineptly, which they did, but in the beginning they were an outright propaganda machine for the Chinese Communist Party. They were saying things like that COVID could not be spread orally. It's like, oh, okay, so it can't be spread at all, perhaps, or what? And well, of course, they had no data to back that up. They're just saying whatever China wanted them to say. So you can't claim to be a World Health Organization and then just be used as a puppet by some random foreign government. Yeah, of course I don't want to have anything to do with that. It's not scientific. And I always say this caveat whenever I talk about the CDC or the WHO people. It's like I still cite their figures, I still use their data and their information. I'm just much more careful when I read it.
Hmm.
So because I realize that they are not a great authority on anything. So you just
Yeah,
take
I like the
each
little
individual
shrug.
thing
You're like,
with a
I
grain
still
of
use
salt.
it.
So I mean, yeah, they got some good data. They still have good scientists who work there, good researchers, but the people running it are corrupt. Um, and so again, to answer your question, go back to one other thing I forgot to mention. The most exciting thing, for me, yes, immigration, especially specifically designating the foreign cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. But also, I agree, the parting the J6ers is a big thing for me because, like you're saying, and just to support what you said, it's not just that you have people say who are, again, you always get to the extremes of the mainstream media, but it's not just people assaulting police officers in the Capitol who are being like let off the hook, although we see that in New York and California all the time, but I digress. uh, it's also people who not only say trespassed and didn't realize it was a crime, but oh, it wasn't actually a crime, so we're going to charge you fairly. You have people who were just on the Capitol grounds who have been given years in prison. Like the prison sentences made no sense. These DC district courts were charging maximum sentences to all of these people involved. So for that reason, I agree it was politically motivated. And you made a statement that I think some people would kind of their ears would prick up at, which is that it made us as Christians wonder who's next. And I think a lot of people be like, oh, okay, like you're not, a victim group. Like you're overreacting. Some of these people who are being targeted by this executive order are not only January 6th protesters who, I think there's about 1,500 people who have been released from prison from this executive order. There's a handful more where their sentences were commuted, but they weren't fully pardoned, at least yet. Their sentences or cases still have to be discussed in more detail. That would be people, for example, if they did, say, assault an officer, they're not going to be immediately pardoned. Their sentences may be commuted to a lower sentence, but it still has to be discussed. But it's a lot of people who were just present and then arrested, slapped them maximum sentences. You also have people who are targeted for their protests and appearances at school boards. So this was another issue that we've had. We've had multiple times where Catholic organizations, Catholic people have been harassed over the last 4 years under Biden, which is a very sad irony that he is Catholic, at least in name.
In name, yeah.
And yet we still have had Catholic persecution. So you've seen this with pro-lifers. You've seen this with, again, these parents who would go to these school boards and then they would be arrested and charged for trying to protect education and their children in the education system. So, yeah, it's not just people present January 6th that I know some people that I have to sadly discuss this with will say it's like, oh, well, they're, what's the word for the January 6th, like not a riot, but insurrectionists. Like these people are insurrectionists. It's like, okay, the 70-year-old grandmother who's just walking after the Trump rally is not an insurrectionist. But regardless, no, it's not even just January 6th. There's been a lot of people in different situations who have been charged and arrested just for seemingly trying to protect Christian beliefs. And a lot of it is not very well known. So those people have also been pardoned and commuted by that.
Yeah. And there was a lot going on that I know we're not going to get into tonight, but a lot of questionable things happening that day, with who was actually present and
even
barricades being moved. And
even Trump said during the signing that there were FBI agents present. Cause I think the director, Chris Wray, I think he said 20 something FBI agents were present. I think that was during the subcommittee investigation. So we know FBI agents were present. They're not hiding that fact. We don't really know how many were present or what degree they played a role, especially in inciting people to go and to get worked up. That's really what is not very well known. So,
yeah, there was a lot, and we could do a whole segment on that. I don't think it's necessary right now, but I do think that the point still stands. Arresting people like that, like you said, who were peaceful protesters, especially, and who were targeted as being conservative Christian, it sets a dangerous precedent for the future, and for, like you said, pro-lifers being arrested on the street. I mean, this is already happening in England, and just people silently praying on the street corner outside of an abortion mill are getting arrested. They're being questioned. Oh, are you praying? So it's like, to assume that this just can't or won't happen on American soil is a problem, and it's not true. And that's why the church has to be involved every step of the way, involved politically and speaking up and voting and all this stuff. Because I'm looking at what's happening in Europe. I'm like, oh, it's just a matter of time before that happens here, unless the church arises, steps forward, and starts getting involved again.
right.
There is no such thing as a separation of church and state constitutionally. So,
yeah. I forget which Baptist organization. There's a letter between a Baptist organization and Thomas Jefferson.
The Danbury Baptists.
Danbury. Right. And of course, that concept was pinned to protect the church from the state, not vice versa. And most people don't understand that. That's one of the most common fallacies I hear cited when it comes to these political issues. It's like, well, constitutionally, separation of church and state, not in the Constitution. And it's not to protect the government from the church, it's to protect the church from government interference.
Correct, 100%. And actually, if you read the original draft, there's 3 drafts for that amendment. And the term religion was actually defined as denomination, like denomination of the Christian faith. And that's in congressional record. And I believe Fisher Ames was the congressman who drafted the original versions, and he was adamantly for God being at the forefront and the center of American education, and God being at the center of American politics. And so you can go back and read like some of his quotes and and his writings and things, and it's evidence of that. But if you know, all of this is in history and people can go and read it. But yeah, I heard it over and over and over again growing up, of separation of church and state, separate, like when I was working on the floor of the house, you know, and we had a prayer before we would start. This girl, she was sitting next to me, and she got livid, and she was like, this just violates separation of church and state. How dare they pray in the House of Representatives? And she was really worked up over it. And I was like, oh my god, like, you know, who's educating her? So scary stuff. But yeah,
Yeah. So I did just want. The only reason I circled back to the January 6th pardons was specifically to support your point of how important it is for the church to be active and to not say let someone downplay the idea that there has been Christian persecution, and even more importantly, just the Christians who are engaged now today need to be engaged more so, especially in prayer, but also actively in their local politics. I'll tell you a executive order that I do not think is very impactful or very important, which is renaming the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America. I really could not be bothered if it's called this or that. Honestly, here's my point. I think the Gulf of America is a better name because not just for the United States of America, because it is a gulf in the middle of North America, and it shares its watery borders not only with
South
Mexico but
America.
also with it actually doesn't quite get down there, but also with the United States. So it's much larger than just Mexico.
Right.
So it makes sense for it to be a Gulf of America. Now, was it named Gulf of America more so to reflect the United States? Probably, but it still is kind of a better fitting name. And also, the other thing is, he could pin that, he could say that. It doesn't really change it. Like, it really doesn't take effect unless international agencies who are in charge of naming those bodies of water actually pick it up and use it as well. Then it'll
Like
actually.
like they said, it doesn't really get down there. Between the two continents, okay?
It's close. It's close.
Yeah.
It's pretty neatly tucked into the very tip of the southern border of Mexico, but it does come up through a lot of our coast too. So it makes sense.
Well, I liked it. I'm not against it,
I'm not
because I
against it.
think
I'm
it's a
like
statement.
relatively
It's a
for it.
statement.
I'm for it in as much as I'm for kind of any linguistic change is also kind of difficult. Like, I'm for it, but I'll probably still call it Gulf of Mexico more often than not. I'm not gonna like forcibly correct myself because it's not really important to me.
Mm.
But I'm like, okay, it's cool, but I don't really know why it's getting so much media attention. Like, it's one of the most talked about things I'm hearing. I'm like, who
Oh.
cares? Who cares?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's like the least important out of all the ones that were signed, 100%. I just thought it was notable because I know he's doing it to make a statement, because he said this is going to be the golden age of America.
Right.
It's America first.
It's
And so
on
he was
brand
doing
for
it as,
sure.
yeah, and he did it to garner the publicity and the traction and
Yeah.
everything. And hey man, that's good.
Yeah.
Um
Maybe he wanted to get a bigger spotlight on these executive orders he was doing. So he maybe threw out a couple that would get attention, like the TikTok thing. To me, is also um, seemingly. I don't know if it's even like gonna make a difference because so he's postponed the ban for 75 days to, in theory, work out a deal. But they still might not. I don't think ByteDance has indicated any interest in doing such a deal. So I don't. Maybe that will change. I mean, he said that he might use tariffs to spur China into getting on board. Maybe it will make a difference. But I could easily see this also just becoming like 75 days pass, TikTok does get banned, but Trump is like, hey, I tried to save it. Wasn't me, you know?
There's so much more going on with that whole thing, and I don't know enough about it because I was really watching everything being said about it. And then the app did, I was on it the night, Saturday night late when it went down, and like people's profiles slowly started disappearing, and then you couldn't access the comments. And then it was like this one person on live stream that I saw left in the feed. But then boom, the next day it was back up in action. And people, there's so many speculations circulating the web right now, like that Meta's involved, because all these congressmen bought these shares in Meta, supposedly like right before this whole thing. So they're wondering like if now there was a deal that was made. And I don't know. I don't know if China does. I read an article in Epic Times forever ago that through ByteDance, data is being collected and given to China. And if that is the case, that is very serious. But then again, like, how many American companies are already selling our data to whoever? I'm not saying it excuses TikTok if they're selling our data to China, but I'm just saying, like, I feel like it's so much more of a threat, uh, the buying and selling of American data, and that there's so much more going on with TikTok than what meets the eye. And so I'm going to refrain from commenting anymore on it because I don't know. Haven't figured it out yet.
Well, another issue related to China is I don't actually think this is an executive order or anything thus far. There's kind of two that are similar that are foreign diplomacy-esque issues, but the one related to China is the Panama Canal, which
Mm.
Trump has said that we're going to take control back over. Again, I don't think there's any executive order related to that currently. I don't know if it even would be an executive order. It might be kind of like a forced deal with Panama to give us the canal back. So I know we sold to them under Jimmy Carter for like a dime or something. So it might just be
Yeah,
like, actually, we're going
I
to buy this back from you for whatever value we tell you it's worth, kind of thing.
do you remember like why it was sold to begin with? Like, I
I
forgot.
think Jimmy Carter, a lot of his policy was related to, I think some of it good, but a kind of a brand of foreign policy where the idea was we're going to create our reputation based on helping other countries, and so you had like the Peace Corps and stuff like that. I think it's just related to that, and the idea of just being like, this is their canal, it's next to their country, not ours. We're just going to let them control it and have use over it and let it be theirs, kind of thing.
Hmm.
And I think it was probably celebrated at the time, at least in Panama, probably. But the problem is, and this is the point that Trump made. Okay, so we sold the Panama Canal back to Panama, which we didn't have to do that, and maybe we shouldn't have. I don't know. Probably, certainly, maybe not for the price, but we sold it to Panama, but now China's controlling it. So that's not how this works. And the problem is, China also is kind of using that same diplomatic strategy where they've gone and built schools in Panama and built hospitals and built roads and like, hey, we're helping the infrastructure. You mind if we take this little river canal? And they're like, oh, take it, sure, we don't care. And now that's why you have Trump back. Like, okay, we're taking this back. Like, you have poorly managed this gift that you should have got in the first place.
Yeah,
Um,
it just goes to show you that anything can be bought and sold at a certain price.
and taken back.
Um,
You give someone a gift. You say you want it back. 50 years later, we'll take that back now.
yeah, it's a strategic point, and I'm glad
Well,
that
for
Trump
sure.
is wanting to take it back. So
And the other strategic point that Trump wants to take is Greenland. And again, there's no executive order about it. Um, it would really come down to currently it is a Dutch territory, right? It's owned by Denmark, so it would be a matter of Denmark selling it to the United States, as far as I'm aware. Greenland does not have autonomy. I think there was some kind of I don't know if there was an actual official motion. I think there has been discussion in Greenland about becoming their own country. I don't think they can financially support themselves. That's a problem. So they need currently Denmark or somebody to support them. So I think it is possible that Trump could strike a deal with Denmark and purchase Greenland. Again, a lot of media attention on that, but currently it is not in the lineup of
yeah,
executive
I think
orders.
my only thoughts on it are why. Like, I'm intrigued. Is it because it's a great military
That's what he said.
positioning, or is there something in the ground, oil or some natural that we need to mine or dig for that would benefit
America
America?
loves
So
their
it's,
oil.
but it'll be interesting. Definitely can see a Trump hotel going in every day.
Yeah, for sure. New resort. I'll
Yeah,
cruise there. A little
golfing
cold,
location.
but
um,
similar to renaming Gulf of Mexico, do you have any opinion on renaming Mount Denali back to Mount McKinley?
yeah, I didn't care about that, but
Yeah, I
what?
didn't either. I'm surprised it's even like on someone's radar to bring it to Trump's attention. Like who pitched that to him? Like, sir, you know
Yeah,
what
day
Obama
one.
did to Mount Denali or to Mount McKinley? He named it Mount Denali. Can you believe that, sir? Oh, we got to change that back. Interestingly, I started doing research on William McKinley because I didn't know anything about that president. Because I was like, why is it named after him? Apparently, a prospector just named the mountain after him because he liked William McKinley. There's actually a lot of similarity between McKinley and Trump. Funny enough, McKinley was big on boosting American economy, especially by protecting American corporations from like foreign, um, not theft, but taking companies out of America and taking it from the American worker. And he was like boosting the factories in America at the time, and he kind of a little bit of an economic golden age for America under McKinley. I'm like, this guy is very similar to Trump. That's like all the same points that I hear Trump making, McKinley was making 130 years ago or so. So
Hmm.
McKinley had 2 terms, but at the I think 9 months or so into his second term, he was assassinated. And McKinley probably would have been better remembered because he did have a good presidency and strong economic policy that did help the country. But when he's assassinated, the person who takes over after McKinley, his vice president, is Teddy Roosevelt. So
I
Teddy's popularity
love
just kind
Teddy.
of like dwarfed McKinley and kind of maybe hid him in the shadow of history. But
Yeah, I
McKinley had
don't.
a great
I honestly,
reputation.
I didn't even remember he got assassinated. That's why I was like reacting. I was like, oh, shame.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I need to read up
Um,
on that.
I, to me, this is at least the second case, not as severe this time around. At least he did have a full term where he did good work, and his VP was also good. So very different that way. But similar case, whenever I see a good president assassinated, it's always the question like what could have happened, what would have happened. And same thing happened to JFK in my mind. It's
Mm,
like
mm.
JFK seemed to be saying a lot of good things. A lot of people really loved him. Huge populist candidate. And then he dies. Much more tragic JFK. Not only did he not have a full term, pretty sure he got assassinated for the end of his first term, but then
He
Lyndon B. Johnson takes over after him, just does a horrible job.
JFK, and I hope all the information comes out on that. But he really made some very large enemies, big, huge enemies, both foreign and domestic. And I won't name who because I don't want to get into that right now. But if you go and look into it, it's like, oh shoot, and stuck his finger in the CIA's business and stuff too. And so it's like, man, what really was going on. We all have theories about who actually assassinated him, but I hope the real facts come out about that case, so the American people, I think, we're privy to that. We should be privy to that information, and we should know.
And those
So
JFK files are something that Trump said that he would actually release this time around. So
good.
I do hope it happens. I'm curious if there is anything in there. That's because why has it been confidential this whole time? Um,
Hmm.
curious, and I know the whole story of JFK and what's going on behind the scenes became a lot more popular over the last year, I guess year and a half at this point, with RFK Jr.'s campaign because he talked about
Yeah.
his uncle a lot. So, but
Yeah,
yes, that's
I think it's going to happen. I only have two more executive orders that I want to very quickly mention. I know you may have wanted to mention the vehicle one, but just the two sexes policy and
and I think specifically is that the U.S. government recognizes 2 genders, not just 2 sexes, if I understand that
okay,
correctly, which is
I'm
more of like a political statement.
so I didn't want to have to go into these waters tonight with the gender thing. Gender was a coined term.
Male gametes. That's what makes me male.
No, your sperm don't make you male.
Then what does?
It's a constellation.
I'm not saying we have to go into it. I'm just saying that I think the executive order specifically said 2 genders, which is even more drastic.
Okay, it says it's called the two sexes policy. I'm just going to read
Okay,
from my
go
notes.
ahead.
Quote, as of today, it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States that there are only two genders, male and female. And this is what Trump said in his inauguration speech. The federal government will no longer promote gender ideology and will revoke the Biden administration's effort to expand Title IX to include gender identity. So it also goes on to say that it will also protect women's privacy in intimate spaces such as bathrooms and changing rooms. Love that. While safeguarding also against enforcing pronoun policies that encroach upon free speech. 100%. And you can follow like Jordan Peterson's story in Canada of what happened to him as a professor and how the courts got involved. It's a messy, messy thing. So yes, defense of free speech, defense of women's privacy and restrooms and changing areas and in sports, huge.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Apparently, the prevented compelled speech applies to not only government facilities but workplaces and schools. So that sounds like a pretty broad protection over this 2 gender new official norm. Um, and yeah, again, I completely know where you're coming from on the gender versus sex thing. I do recall that gender was coined not too long ago by that pedophile psychologist who was just demented in his sexual
Yeah, I'm trying to
ideology.
remember his name.
I don't even care to remember saying, to be honest. I'm happy not to. But I do remember the roots. Realistically, the only scientific use a term like gender has is if you use it synonymously with sex. But the current modern day ideological warfare is the whole idea is gender ideology, where they're trying to separate that from biological sex.
Right.
So the fact that it does say two genders is more on the nose of the current cultural battle at hand.
So maybe they're just trying to reclaim the word
Probably.
and make it synonymous with biological sex. Maybe.
I think, yes, that does sound like what they're doing. Wait, the fact that you only recognize two genders, that's the same as two sexes. So
Yeah, it says actually in the executive order, it says the purpose. Across the country, ideologues who deny the biological reality of sex have increasingly used legal and other socially coercive means to permit men to self-identify as women and gain access to intimate single-sex spaces and activities designed for women. From women's domestic abuse shelters to women's workplace showers, etc. This is wrong. I can hear Trump saying it. This is wrong. Efforts to eradicate the biological reality of sex fundamentally attacks women by depriving them of their dignity, safety, and well-being. I mean, that's well said.
yeah, very well said. And looking at some of these kind of rescinded executive orders, so a lot of rescinded orders that Biden signed were things related to gender discrimination, things related to green/climate change/environmental justice mandates. And so we saw the Paris Accords, we're going to mention that. And the third one that where there's a lot of the kind of counter executive orders going on right now, or that went on Monday, were related to DEI and other biases as far as hiring in the federal government. So Trump's statement is that the hiring in federal government will be based on colorblind and merit-based. And so he has essentially undone, seemingly, those diversity, equity, inclusion mandates and requirements. Another part of that and Trump's ability to run the federal government, specifically run the executive branch to his liking as the head of the executive branch, is what I mentioned to you over text, that Schedule F. And it sounds like he is able to reclassify these federal employees as Schedule F, or in other words, at-will employees, which means that if you are employed at will, you can be unemployed or fired at will. And it doesn't have to be this legal issue of why are you firing this. And again, the only argument I've heard against this from someone is like, oh, Trump's going to fire government employees and replace them with his own sycophants. And to me, my idea is if you are the elected leader of the executive branch, it only makes sense that people working for you directly under you would support your mission, your goal, because that's who the American people elected. It makes no sense to me to elect a president and in his own branch, we're not talking about checks and balances of Congress or the courts. In his own branch, there's just these unknown, unelected cogs in the machine that can just oppose you and prevent what you want to do. That's why in some cases an executive order will take months or years before it comes to fruition, because you just has to go through this bureaucracy, and it comes on someone's desk who doesn't like it and goes, I'm going to forget about this for as long as I can. And it's like, fire that guy. Absolutely fire that guy. I don't want him to be employed. So yes, and so it should not be a legal process like, oh, do you have the right to fire him? Yes, please give the president the right to hire and fire anyone in his own branch who he was appointed to the head position of, as like he's essentially should be the CEO of the executive branch. So he should be able to hire and fire people at will. So kind of related to like gender discrimination and DEI-based mandates, but even better, more important in my mind, is the Schedule F, specifically better for the federal government. You need to be able to hire and fire people easily. And without that, Doge, another thing that was done is that Doge was officially started. It's being run by Elon Musk, not Vivek Ramaswamy. He dropped out of it. I don't know if you heard that.
Wait, really?
Vivek Ramaswamy backed out of Doge. It seems his team is saying that it's because he's interested now in running for Ohio governor. So he wanted to be appointed to fill the missing Ohio Senate seat. I forgot who was the person in Ohio Senate that Trump.
John, I have a quick question about him, and just out of curiosity, because I'm not, there are a few players obviously that I'm not so sure about, but do you know if Vivek was ever funded by Soros or had any connections to the
Never
Soros
heard it.
Foundation? Okay, because
I know he's like a billionaire through his like biomedical company. I don't really know anything about him beyond that. But okay. I think if he wants to run for Ohio governor, he's probably got a pretty good shot based on all the national coverage he's gotten. but
No, and he knows that too.
he
You
still
know.
has to run and get elected. So, and we would see. Then we'd have a good test of his character. I think test him on the state scale. That might be a good place to test him out. See what he does for Ohio. Assuming he does win, which I think he would. Again, because you currently have a Republican governor, Mike DeWine. I'm pretty sure his approval ratings are fine. So I don't think you're going to swap to a Democrat governor. I don't think there's anyone even who's like an up and coming challenger. So I could see that staying Republican, and if Vivek goes for it, I could see that going Vivek. See how he does. But yes, Doge has been started. It's now fully run by Elon instead of saying Elon and Vivek. And the only reason that Doge is even going to be able to function is because you have that Schedule F. Because Doge is not an official government branch. They do not have hire or firing capabilities. They only can advise the OMB, the Office of, Management and Budget, something like that. That is where Russ Vought is now yet again nominated to be the secretary of that position, because secretary of that cabinet, or where the official title is. But he was appointed to that position at the last year of Trump's first term, and now he's coming back. And his whole, according to the interview I watched, his whole idea is that if you don't have control of that specific branch, the OMB, you can't really hire or fire people. You cannot control the executive branch. And when it came to signing that specific executive order that had the Schedule F, the at-will firing, Trump said this was to remove the cancer from the government, because he says I see it as a cancer. So for kind of the original drain the swamp idea, the whole anti-deep state or administrative state, all of that could be summed up as what is now being signed with the Schedule F thing, where you actually can now just start getting rid of people that you don't want. Because up until now, you really couldn't. So that's an interesting one.
Yeah, it is. And I think he covered a lot of ground, like you said, in one day with the stroke of a pen. And it was impressive.
Yeah. And the only other thing I'd mention, just more toward the environmental stuff, we said Paris Accords. He also stated it's a national energy emergency, which is going to, again, similar with the southern border emergency, immigration emergency. This is going to allow him to just free things up very quickly and move things like drilling in Alaska.
Yep.
You had the LNG issue, the liquefied natural gas that was cut off seemingly for no reason. This was hurting Louisiana. All those things can be just flipped back on seemingly overnight.
Yeah, and talk about aiding the economy quickly.
Yeah.
That's great.
That's what one reporter asked, like, what are you going to do to help inflation immediately? And he said, energy. So we'll have to see if that's actually the case. I know Trump did not reduce federal spending in his first term, and supposedly it was all a part of a plan for the second term, which we will now get to see if that was true or not. So I expect to see and hope to see federal spending go down over the second term, and our debt actually finally start to turn around and go the other direction. One can hope.
100%. I think we're going to see a lot more just in the next few days, especially the next several weeks.
Well, look, at the rate he's moving, it shouldn't take more than, give him a year, give him a few months for all these things to actually officially go into place. Yeah. And we should start seeing some big movements.
Definitely. And I think he's had a lot of time to think about this. He already had a term in office, and so he understands the game. And I think he's good at strategy. He understands the economy really well. He's a businessman, and he loves the nation. So I believe it's going to move a lot faster. And that's only to our advantage, to America's advantage. I will say what I'm going to start keeping eyes on as well are, like, anything that has to do with human trafficking. And I know that the drug cartel is hugely connected to all of that, and I know he's fighting that, so that in turn is also fighting human sex trafficking. But there are a lot of missing kids, and it's a major issue, and it weighs kind of heavily on me. So I'm really hoping that soon that we see some major movement in that field, and maybe a few executive orders signed for something to aid that initiative as well.
Well, that's something that Tom Homan mentioned, Border Czar. He said that we're going to start immediately deporting millions of illegal immigrants, and he said we also have 300,000 missing children to find. So I think it is a major focus of the immigration policies, not just deport illegal immigrants, but find the missing children, especially who have been currently being taken advantage of by these immigration policies.
Definitely. Well, on that note, I think that wraps almost everything up for our very quick summary of all the executive orders
Not
and
so
Trump's
quick.
first day. Yeah, quick, but not so quick. But thanks for coming on with me and covering everything.
It's fun.
As always, it was
Happy to
fun.
be
It was a
here.
pleasure. Yeah. All right, Jon. Well, thank you, and until next time.
Great. Good night, Jen.
Good night.